I sang in the choir of St. John's College in Cambridge. There, the chorister's life had a different quality from that which David Blackhall remembers. It was centred in the long, lofty chapel, with rows of saints looking down from the painted ceiling, and serious, imposing statues of famous fellows near the entrance. It was a little awesome, and characterized by a pressing sense of tradition. For me, this was contained especially in externals that formed the uniform and accoutrements of our life, things like our dapper Eton suits, and the bulky, old-fashioned music stands at the choir school, and the heavy leather bindings of our anthem books, some nearly a century old. There was tradition, too, in certain long-established habits. For instance, we would always sing the same music on certain Sundays of the year, or, going in procession from school to chapel, we always marched rigidly in step with precisely an arm's length between the ranks. Or again, we always turned sharply into the choir stalls from a particular flagstone in the aisle. Such things, established by long habit, took on a mysterious, unspoken significance. We had a professional pride in our performance, and practised hard at school for 5 or 6 hours each week, longer if the music was new in our repertoire. Our choirmaster, the chapel organist, called these sessions the tuning up of his singing machine, and we sweated at scales and exercises to preserve a machine-like efficiency as the foundation of our singing. In Cambridge, we were second only to King's College Choir, and were highly conscious of this reputation. So wrong notes, uncertain pitch, or poor phrasing were unpardonable errors, like slurs on the honour of the regiment. So it seemed an enormous spanner that I threw well-nigh irretrievably into the works on the occasion of my first solo. The choral introduction went smoothly, my cue came, then a major catastrophe. Stage fright struck me totally silent. Mercifully, it was midweek evensong, and the small congregation seemed unperturbed, but the whole choir rocked visibly with surprise, while the organ faltered and nearly stopped altogether. After 4 long and empty bars, panic abated, and furiously blushing, I struggled weakly through the remaining phrases of the passage. Afterwards, as we were taking off our surplices, the boys were coldly aloof from the one who had let the side down. I heard, with a miserable drop of the heart, the choirmaster's deliberate steps ring down the length of the emptied chapel. He stopped in front of me, obviously still shaken by the incident. His words were brief, bald, and barbed. "Parry, don't you dare do that again." I didn't. We too had our initiation ceremony carried out in solemn pomp. One became a fully fledged choir boy on a dark evening after service, when the verger had gone home. The chapel lights were switched out, a candle or two produced, and the choir formed a double line in forbidding silence before a statue in the antechapel. In the echoing gloom, the fledgling was ordered to advance with stiff upper lip, to bow to his colleagues, and kiss the statue's toe. I remember the stone had grown smooth and shiny from the custom. The slightest signs of reluctance were rapidly overcome by love pats deftly delivered with psalters by the senior boys to welcome the newcomer to the ranks. The year had its more cheerful highlights, of course. We sang madrigals and part songs in the concert at the college May ball, and were let loose after the interval to riot and gorge on the remains of the buffet. Occasional weddings meant extra pocket money, and the novelty of wearing white bow ties. And then there was Ascension Day, when we sang on top of the chapel tower. It was 140 feet high, and it's said that the late Dr. Cyril Rougham instituted the ceremony about 40 years ago to prove a point to some scientist acquaintances who told him that the sound would not be heard from the ground. On that morning, the head choir boy rigorously reviewed his squad. He was somewhat of a sergeant major figure to us, short, imposing, and always immaculate, and passionately insistent that our hair and our shoes should shine with an equal radiance. It was invariably a fine day, and our stiff white collars gleamed in the sun, The creases in our pinstripe trousers were razor sharp, and exactly half an inch of shirt cuff protruded from the sleeves of our tight black jackets. In the crowd of onlookers at the foot of the tower, American tourists, wreathed in cameras, were delighted with the sight of us. We posed, faintly blasé and consciously cherubic. In single file, we went through an old wooden door with old rusty hinges, and began to climb the uneven stone steps of a spiral staircase. Inside it was midnight black and the air was stale. We wore short academic gowns that brushed and hissed on the stone walls at each side of us. Nobody spoke. We were all counting the steps, but no one ever agreed on the total. It was always 200 and something. If one of us stopped, the whole line cannoned into him, and quite uncherubic exclamations resounded in the dark. Halfway up, we passed a big, bare room in the tower, with clouds of dust dancing in beams of sunlight that sloped from its slatted windows. The ghost of our initiation statue lived here, along with umpteen of the town's pigeons that flapped and whirred in confusion as we passed. We climbed higher, grew giddier, and trudged more wearily. Then, perspiring and red-faced, we burst suddenly onto the tower's leaded roof, to be dazzled at once by the brightness of the sunshine. Our collars were now grubby and uncomfortable, trouser creases had crumpled, and shirt cuffs hung loosely or had vanished altogether. For a few moments we recovered our breath and straightened our dress. We stared through stonework tracery at the unfamiliar perspective over jumbled roofs of surrounding colleges, and sometimes you could see Ely Cathedral on the horizon 16 miles away. Below, miniature traffic threaded its sluggish way through the hopelessly narrow streets. Pigeons glided lazily to roosting places among the masonry, and friends waved spasmodically from the little crowd. If the head boy wasn't looking, some of us would surreptitiously send matchsticks or paper pellets twirling to the ground. Then our choirmaster marshalled us to sing. Several undergraduates prepared to accompany us on brass instruments, and it always surprised me that someone somehow had carried trombones and trumpets up those stairs. At a lift of the conductor's baton, we were off at full throttle, singing "The Lord Ascendeth Up on High," an Ascension Day carol by Pretorius. The breeze lifted the corners of our music and ruffled our hair, and it carried the singing down to the audience in the courtyard, who heard it softly but clearly above the hum and murmur of the town, as they will no doubt hear it again on Thursday next.